Hi there.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Sorry to be on the road. Have I got called into the office today. They need some help this morning, so I'm walking down to work while doing this.
No problem. I'll take any time I can get.
Yeah.
All right. So basically, I'm just going to start off with a little introduction, and then I'll have you introduce yourself. We'll kind of go from there. So
Sounds
it
good.
is 9:32 a.m. on Wednesday, March 3rd. My name is Marley Schultz, and today I'll be speaking with Alexander Martin. Let's see. I want to note first that, of course, you can share as little or as much detail as you prefer. If you kind of are uncomfortable about a topic or a question, we can move on. Just let me know. Also, I'd like to preface that obviously you are more than your labels. Nobody is one thing. However, because this is for the LGBTQ plus archive and resource center on Bradley's campus, we'll be focusing more on like identities of sexuality and possibly race and the cultures that fit within those boxes. But of course, you are more than that. I am more than that. That's simply just the focus. So if you want to introduce yourself, name, pronouns, kind of title, aliases, if that happens, education, all that stuff.
Sorry about the traffic noise.
You're good.
I'm Alexander Martin. My pronouns are they, them. I'm a non-binary trans and Black artist living and working out of Peoria, Illinois. I also am a performer and entertainer with the stage name Artemisia Van Ho. And I work in academia teaching, maintaining a studio practice, and in public health doing HIV prevention and care for Central Illinois Friends.
Gotcha. So starting off with your membership and involvement in the LGBTQ plus community, starting at the very beginning, what is your first or some early memories that you have about your own sexuality?
I remember from the time I could remember things. So I'm assuming around 3 years old, maybe dipping into 2. I remember feeling different than the stuff I was seeing on TV because a lot of our gender roles and stereotypes are prescribed to us at a very young age. And so I remember feeling like they would see man getting married, having kids and settling down, and like uncles and aunts talk about, oh, you're going to make a woman real happy when just saying all sort of prescriptive things. And I just remember like nodding my head and feeling like I was agreeing to it, but something didn't quite feel right. But as a small child, you don't really have the vernacular or the vocabulary to like state how you feel. And so it just felt, I was like, I guess that's what I'm supposed to do. But then as I got older, I learned certain terms and things resonated with me. And I was like, oh no, I think I may be this. But then I also learned that was maybe not the most supported thing, not the most supported identity. And it was a little bit scary, like hearing the term. It was exciting to be like, oh, that's me. I'm a part of that community, I think. But then it was also a little bit scary being like, oh no.
That exactly. Do you remember what age you kind of came out to your family and or friends?
Well, I came out to myself in college, actually. Okay. Said it out loud when I was 20. And then came out to a few of my friends saying, first coming out is like, I think I like guys, not quite knowing about my gender identity yet. Definitely feeling not at home in the realm and role of American maleness, but hadn't gone on that journey yet. But I came out saying like, I think I like guys. Said it to myself and started sharing it with a few friends. I actually didn't come out to my family until I moved to Peoria. I waited until I was self-sustained, self-sufficient, had a safety net in case things went south.
Right.
And it was in my own place to make it my own. So it was when I moved to Peoria, I started living my truth. And then that also let me explore and navigate and realize my identity.
Gotcha. So why move to Peoria? I know you're from West Virginia. That's a far move.
Yeah. So I got my undergraduate degree, got my bachelor in fine arts at West Virginia University. And I always had aspirations when I was a small kid of like living in like New York or moving to a big city, somewhere on the East, because West Virginia is sort of on the East Coast.
Right.
And well, not on the coast, but in that realm. But and so I was looking at schools in Pittsburgh and a few other places up north, but then I went with my friend to an art exhibit to help her install in Chicago. And I was like, whoa, like I fell in love with Chicago. I thought it was super cool. The city was super different.
Yeah.
Started applying to graduate schools in this area. And I got, Bradley was recommended by my undergrad professor because he went to Bradley for undergrad and he knew the art faculty here.
Gotcha.
And then Bradley gave me the best offer. And so I came to Peoria.
Love that.
And now I love it here and still live here.
Of course, yeah. I mean, there's some good stuff about Peoria. I was pleasantly surprised.
Yeah.
So in that kind of realm and outside of the kind of higher education and academia sphere of Bradley's campus, what kind of environment have you found here in terms of being a person of color and being a member of the LGBTQ community?
I have found a very good and secure bubble where I can, well, not a bubble, I should say, but a safe space where I can be myself. I had room to explore and a community that uplifted that and listened and appreciated my gender journey and my sexuality journey. So I had room to wiggle here and it was really awesome. Like I remember last year, I was having a beer outside and I hadn't seen my drag mother. We were all socially distanced,
right?
But I hadn't seen my drag mother in forever because of the pandemic. And she started using my correct pronouns, like right on the spot, and hearing my coworkers start to do that. Because I was always afraid of like, I was like, oh, I'm going to come out, but people aren't going to see my truth. They're not going to try to navigate that. And so it was just very welcoming. And there is pushback. Like Peoria is a big city. There's lots of people who also aren't so supportive. And I've had friction in those spaces, but there's a really good core community that supports and uplifts voices like mine. I'm very happy to be a part of. And then also with being Black, I have found a Black community here. Like we recently founded the Peoria Guild of Black Artists, whereas like growing up, there weren't a lot of people of color in my hometown. Like I was one of like 5 in my whole high school. Mm-hmm. And so I learned things I experienced growing up, microaggressions and other things that I thought were just like, oh, that's an unfortunate experience. I'm like, oh no, that's from being a person of color.
Yeah.
Especially because like I'm biracial, so I was raised by my mother's side of my family, so predominantly white with some Native American folks, or indigenous people on that side of the family, but not a whole lot of people of color. And so it's just my sister and I. And so I never necessarily had that full community. My mom did her best and taught me a lot and taught me how the world may treat me because of my experience or my appearance. But when I moved to Peoria, I actually found a community and learned the stuff I went through wasn't abnormal. That was just the experience of being a POC in America.
Right. So I mean, going back to high school and then moving into college, you mentioned microaggressions, and I'm wondering if you had not a unique experience, but particularly maybe like a hard time during high school, perhaps with bullying or just with kind of not feeling like you belonged anywhere, because I think that's a pretty universal experience. However, I just want to know if you had a certain take on that.
Yeah, I had a core group of friends in band and theater and art, of course, the safer zones in most public high schools that were cool, but there was still, even amongst my friend groups, like I got called multiple times like, oh, you're the whitest Black person I've ever met, or you don't sound Black, or you don't act Black. Things like that, or people touching my hair without my consent. And I just sort of chalked it up to like, okay, like that's just weird. But now it's like, no, that's messed up and a violation of my space and reinforcing stereotypes that don't exist.
Right.
And so that was hard. Like I was angry a lot. I still had a core group of friends that were really awesome, and a group of people I felt home with, a group of people where I could explore. Sorry, I have to put my mask on. I'm at work.
You're good.
A group of people where I could explore growing up and developing friendships and stuff of that nature. But there was still always that air of something else. And I have guilt still to this day of being a bystander or participating in the bullying of other people to protect myself. Like I had my fair share of experiences with folks, but then you would see it happening to other folks, and you're too afraid to intervene because you don't want it to happen to you again.
Right.
Which I feel like is a lot of people's experience in high school. It's like, well, this person's more out or more vocal, so they're gonna get before. It's like they're gonna take some of the heat from me so I can hide.
Right.
And I still I think about, oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead. Finish your thought.
I was just like, I still think being able to be in the space where I'm safe and happy and reconnecting with some of these people and seeing them living in their truth is good, but it just makes me think of how we sort of gravitated towards each other.
Right.
And sort of shared this experience in public school.
Right. So obviously coming to Bradley, it is a little bit more liberal. However, there are still, conservative views, and I've experienced it. However, did you feel, because you were older, maybe more acceptance and more kind of wiggle room to be who you are, and instead of, high school is tricky for everyone, so college is kind of that turning point, maybe?
Yeah, well, in undergrad, back in WV, I definitely had room to explore because it was a huge university. There was like 40,000 students there my freshman year.
Gotcha.
And so I had room to explore and learn new things. Still wouldn't accept certain truths about myself because everyone has that journey for themselves.
Right.
But other aspects of myself, I started experimenting with how I present myself. I started changing how I dress, being proud of the things I like. Like, I feel like in high school, we hide things sometimes because we don't want to be picked on or messed, so we won't confidently say the things we're proud of. But I just remember in college having more room to be like, I really like this musician, or I really like this film, or I really like this thing, and having room to do that. But then coming to grad school, I had already sort of begun. I was a little bit more quiet when they started, but I had already begun that journey, so it was like a continuation of that momentum. I think the biggest thing I noticed different-wise was sort of class disparity.
Sure, yeah.
Just because like West Virginia is a relatively poor state, and so I went to school with a lot of people who similar socioeconomic background. But Bradley I didn't know it was a private school when I applied because I was looking for scholarships.
Nice.
But I didn't have that same barrier that someone may have coming to Bradley as a private institution.
Right.
And so I noticed a little bit of a class difference. I interacted with people from the suburbs for the first time because we don't really have suburbs in West Virginia. Other places around, like where I went to college, had suburbs, like Pittsburgh and a few other places. So I met some, but in the Midwest, I feel like there's a real suburban culture.
For sure. Yeah, 100%. Looking at that different kind of environment and culture within suburbia, even though Peoria is technically a metropolitan area and it has a diverse group of people who are living there, are there many safe spaces that you found when you first came to Peoria, or have you kind of discovered more through things like drag or your fellow Black community, like your art guild? What are those spaces? Are they more kind of in the background? Are they covert? Or do you find that the LGBTQ community is finding, safe spaces to come out and be themselves within the, large metropolitan area?
I feel like it took not a lot of searching, but just proper placement, like Main Street, the Renaissance Park area, District 2, if you're looking at voting and politics,
right,
has a lot of different kinds of people living there, and that's where Bradley's at. And so being outside of Bradley's campus, like grad school, especially in the arts, it's a lot of research and making. And so I needed to find something to do to not lose my mind. And so going to local events like First Friday, walking down the streets like local businesses and bars and restaurants, I started meeting members of the community, and sort of through introductions from different people, found the community pretty quickly. And a pretty awesome community, and then slowly felt more and more confident to start coming out more, being myself more. So I don't want to say it's necessarily hidden, but I think Peoria is big enough, and it's like geographically segregated. Like white flight happened here in the 60s. It is a
Right.
like classic byproduct of mid-century racism. But so there's, I think the greater Peoria area may not know that we exist, but like here in like this area, like New Bradley, Main Street, going downtown, the heart of Peoria, there's a nice community. It's also a predominantly Black and Latinx area
Right.
around where I live, which was awesome because again, being in the minority, it's wild to live somewhere where I'm not.
Yeah.
Necessarily. I still am in some regards, but not in others. And so it was cool, like finding that and being a part of that, and then also like learning more about systematic racism, like when you experience it growing up, but then seeing like having jobs in the second district, like local businesses and stuff, and having people coming in being like, oh, this is a cute shop I didn't know existed in the ghetto, or I didn't know this was here, because they think this area is rough, or like your house is going to get broken into, and the only reason they think that because it's a predominantly Black area.
Exactly. Do you think that because of COVID and because people were kind of forced to stay inside and a lot of communication has moved to virtual, do you think that when this is all over and we can go back to kind of normal life, if you will, do you think that it'll be harder per se in finding, like for people like me who are part of the LGBTQ community but haven't lived here that long, do you think it'll be tougher to find those kind of spaces?
I think it'll be easier to find as time goes on, just because there's a lot of movement. We have people, even if the greater Peoria area doesn't support them, we have people running for office that are allies and advocates for the LGBTQ plus community. We have organizations that are growing in strength and size, more and more resources available for the LGBTQ plus community. That I think it's going to be a better and better place to live. And there's going to be pushback. There's always pushback.
Right.
I don't want to have rose-colored lenses of everybody being happy. There's always going to be pushback, but it is happening. I think it's going to be a safer space to live. Like I was 2 years ago, I was in the Journal Star I was Miss Gay Illinois, which is like a drag pageant. And I was on the front page, which I didn't know. She just interviewed me, took some photos, but I was on the front page, and like a lot of awesome support from the community. But then like going on the comment section, which you should never go on the comment section,
right.
Hearing what the outskirts of the Peoria area had to say, it's a little disheartening, and hearing like the sort of nastiness that lives in those areas.
Of course.
But again, we're becoming more connected, louder, advocating more. Like I think it's going to be a good place to live for LGBTQ plus folks.
For sure. Since you mentioned drag, that's the perfect segue.
Yeah.
How did you get into drag? Did it start here in Peoria, or were you interested in it back home in undergrad?
In grad school, I started getting interested in performance. And as I started to nurture parts of my identity more, my drag mother started doing drag because of theater. And like, you're not going to be she can't be in a play all the time, but she can perform regularly as a sort of persona she created. And so I talked to her about being interested in performance and like tying that into my studio practice. And so sort of fell into drag and started performing, and then it sort of took off. I found like a fun, supportive, cool community. But then also it let me nurture my femininity. It let me nurture these parts of myself that I sort of repressed or hid or was afraid to embrace, which helped me sort of go on my gender, navigate my gender identity and sort of understand that more. Like for a long time, like I was doing this pageant, I was in and out of drag a lot. And I sort of had a little bit of a breakdown. I was like, am I a woman? Like I was just really, because I realized it's like I had nurtured this part for so long that now that I was giving it energy, it was flourishing. And I was like, is this who I am?
And like I'd heard and met, and I had friends who were non-binary and genderqueer, but I was like, I didn't know if that was me. But then like after sort of having a little bit of a breakdown, realizing I was like, this is a part of me, like this femininity is a part of me. And it's just come to the surface now that I've made space for it through drag.
Right.
And that let me find a way to live in my truth. Like I was like, oh, this is me. This is also me too. Like they're all me. It's not a binary. It's not a rigid structure. And so that drag helped me navigate that, and then also again bring in performance aspects into my art practice. So now drag and my art like intersect completely. Like they're part of the same thing.
That's awesome. Are there any I'm trying to think, is there any discrimination within the drag community because you are a person of color, or have you experienced or seen anybody else get a kind of discrimination because of that, or is it a really kind of welcoming environment?
It can be, unfortunately, racism within the LGBTQ plus community is runs rampant.
Sure, yeah.
Fortunately enough, in Peoria, like one of the main hostesses is a woman of color, and a lot of her family, or a person of color, she's a drag queen of color. And so a lot of her drag daughters are people of color as well. And so there's like a healthy Black drag community in Central Illinois.
Got it.
Discrimination happens a lot, unfortunately. Like for me, it's a safe space. We also have a lot of trans artists. So like I felt safe navigating my identity, hearing drag queens use your proper pronouns out of drag. It feels so good. It's so nurturing. It's so healthy. But unfortunately, like anything, there's still a white male patriarchy,
right?
Patriarchy that sort of drives that. And so in other areas, and I mean, even in Central Illinois, there can be racism. Like people may not book as many queens of color, or may have different standards for them. There's actually recently they just made the Black Drag Caucus in Chicago after the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. They formed to talk about issues of racism, and like there was a big show hostess up there who has said racist things, has done racist things, and never really booked queens of color. And like now she doesn't have a job anymore, and they sort of fall into the Black community as a chance for them to try to heal. And so I think after with the Black Lives Matter movement gaining traction during this pandemic, because it's always been happening, people of color have been being murdered forever, but I think because everyone was home, everyone had to sit and look and see what we see.
Yeah.
So it's gained a lot of momentum, and that's sort of caught a lot of attention in other areas, in the arts and in drag, of like racism in the drag community. So all my experiences have been relatively positive. Like I've experienced microaggressions, but never like overt racism.
Sure.
In the larger picture, there's still unfortunately a lot, which sucks because like especially drag culture in America was founded by Black trans women. Like it was our ancestry that sort of made the foundation here. Like drag has been around for hundreds of years, but in the US, the culture we use, the vernacular we use, the way we talk, the way we do things, like that's Black culture. And so just used against people of color is upsetting, but I think it's being called to attention more and more. People are being called out and questioned.
Mm-hmm. And so I know that you've performed at like Club Diesel and Pitch. I know that Pitch actually closed down. I don't know if it's permanent because of the pandemic. But do you think once people can start getting back out to these places where it is, celebrated and it's safe for these kinds of communities, do you think that people will be more in search of it now that a lot of like the small businesses have started experiencing like major financial struggle? Or do you think that it'll kind of be within the community to work for new spaces to get these kinds of performances on?
I think both are going to happen. Spaces already in Illinois are opening up for performances like in Bloomington, they do like a ticket system. So like you order, so they like spread you out and then the different areas. So they're making sure they're protecting their customers and their performers, but they get booked up in like 2 seconds. They fill up people want it. Now, some places never really closed.
Right. Yeah.
In a few other states, like some of our surrounding states, a few places never really closed. So not much has changed. But I know here that people are chomping at the bits to get back. Like they miss that experience. Like digital drag is fun, and performances online are fun, but they miss the environment. Like,
Yeah, it's just not the same.
yeah, and like being in like a fully queer space around other people, or like being in a dressing room. Like last year, I did it was like a paint party thing, and so it was like an outdoor venue. And so I was like, okay, I feel safe. I'll perform here.
Yeah.
And like in the dressing room again with entertainers, I was like, not crying, but I was just like, oh my god.
Oh
Like
yeah.
you miss that. And so I think that's going to happen. But I also think people have learned what advocating for themselves looks like. People have learned how to make do and get by and survive. Like, I mean, our community's been surviving we've survived another pandemic. So we're trying
Right.
our
Exactly.
And so I think people have gotten really creative in their solutions. Like with digital performances, there's been so much accessibility being addressed. And like places like I know the Bistro in Bloomington, when they just opened up, they still live streamed so people could watch at home, people who maybe aren't vaccinated yet or still immunocompromised, or people who just couldn't get a ticket because
Right.
it's not safe to gather in large numbers, could watch from home. And like that's just a really simple idea, but now like we could keep that going way past the pandemic. Like
Exactly.
people who have accessibility issues, people who have living with disabilities, like a club is not the best scene always.
Right. Exactly.
Being able to tune in and watch the stuff you love from home is fantastic. And so I think people are going to get more creative, not just with digital things, but like doing drag in a park, doing things
Right.
in music. People are already doing that to try to find spaces, but now I think they're going to do it even more because they realize they can just do it.
Exactly. Yeah. That's awesome. Kind of switching gears, but not really. Looking at the 2019 Miss Gay US of A pageant,
Mhm.
how was that experience overall, and how is it different from doing like local drag shows?
So they do encourage in that pageant creativity and other things, but it's still like for me, it's a little bit more rigid. Like
Yeah.
especially at the time, fresh out of grad school, not working full time anywhere, and pageants are expensive. So you do a lot of fundraising and stuff, but like there's gowns and hair you have to buy and things. And there's a certain look, like they
Hmm.
want you to be creative and express that, but it's very much like a Miss America. Like it's
For sure.
an evening gown. I keep saying evening gown. It's like sleeping wear. It's a gown, a talent, and then interview.
Gotcha.
And you have to get like the right hair and get the right look and get the right things. And that can be really expensive. And so that part was stressful, especially like I was making more money than I ever had before in drag because I was performing so much. Like you get a certain amount of bookings as a state representative,
Mhm.
to the political office. But and so I was making more money in drag, but a lot of that was going back into my drag.
Right.
But also trying to set aside some to like pay bills and pay rent,
Oh yeah.
life. Um, and so that was stressful. But I'm happy I did it because I do think it pushed my drag. I met a lot of cool performers and entertainers, and then getting to go to Texas, definitely would not live in Texas. It's way too spread out for me.
I feel that.
We went down to Dallas for the pageant and like meeting entertainers from all over the country doing different things. Like I knew I wasn't gonna place, and it wasn't like a lack of optimism or a lack of, it was just like these queens, some of these people have been doing this for years. They
Right.
have sponsorships and things like that. And I was like, well, I don't have all that, but like it was still cool. Like I met queens who are famous, and the judges, like getting the feedback from the judges, it was really good feedback. It wasn't like do this or do that. It was, especially at the national level, they were almost nicer than like on the smaller level. They were just like, oh, please keep doing this, explore this more. Like they knew it was my first pageant. They also couldn't believe I'd only been doing drag for like a year. Um, they were really cool feedback that I could apply to my like drag performances as a whole.
Mhm.
There was some backlash and like outside of the judges, like members of the community, not my community, but former members of my community,
Sure.
and other stuff like talking and trash and being rude and um, because they used to be pageant folks or whatever. And so that part was kind of annoying. I was like, I don't know you. Why are you saying mean things? I'm like, oh, I don't know you. This is my first time doing this. I just
Yeah.
tried. And so that was kind of annoying. But the actual process of like navigating navigating that new realm of drag and like meeting, well, it's not new, it's been around forever, but a new realm for me, and
Right.
like performing in that way and meeting other entertainers was fun. It was also a highlight was being on the stage for like finals night, which is like they have everybody dress in the theme of the pageant, which this one was Amazoness.
Okay.
So everyone was wearing like fur and like some people were dressed as Wonder Woman. And I made a giant card because I did a lot of cardboard sculpture,
Mhm.
my art practice. So I made a giant cardboard bodice that
Oh my
had
gosh.
Amazon Prime on it.
Nice.
This is like, oh, I'm from the Amazon.
Right.
And I remember being on stage with all these beautiful entertainers. And then I won an award. It was like a spirit award, which I was not expecting. And like the spotlight pointing to me, and the former Miss Gay US of A who was giving out the award walking up and saying, Amazon Prime, oh my God. And then she started handing me my trophy. And I was like, someone got the joke. That's all I came.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Just looking at your art as a whole, and I've read about the exhibitions that you've done with the Peoria Guild of Black Artists and Project 1612. Is it I don't expect it to be just one thing for you, obviously, because it's expression and it's advocacy. Is there ever Was there ever a moment, I'm sure probably many moments, where you didn't feel satisfied with your work, whether that was drag or physical art?
Yeah, with drag, it happens a lot just because you look at other people, other types of entertainers, and like you compare yourself, even though it's the first rule is to not compare yourself, but you compare
Right.
yourself. Um, but I was making do with what I had and learning, and still always learning. Like I'm never not afraid to learn. And then with my art practice as a whole, now like satisfied with certain things, been satisfied with other things, and because you're always making and producing. And when I left grad school, I went on a residency and made some work in the UK that I was really proud of. But then when I came back, there was this weird space of like I was making work, but I wasn't super attached to it. Um, and I didn't quite see like it just but I was also that person. I was like navigating being out of school and like finding because I went to straight through to grad school, so it's like 7 years of education,
Right.
navigating out of that, like having to work a million jobs to survive, but also still in that academic, but like academia, unfortunately, sort of can leave a scar on people where it's like you always need to be making, you always need to be producing. It ties in, but it leaves a mark on you. And so I was just really dissatisfied with the work I was making because I was forcing things and like doing stuff responsively and just trying to show because it felt cool to live in Peoria, not as a student, but it was a bit of a painful experience. Like
I'm
I also
sure.
had like yeah, it's like I also had like a big loss in my family. In 2019, my sister passed away. And that moment sort of, I mean, that was life-changing, but then in that there was a lot of things happening before that moment where it was like things were starting to coalesce and come together. um, I think that sort of shocked me into like, I need to do what I want and I need to find a way to do that. And I need to find a way to survive and thrive, like not just survive, but thrive.
Right.
And so, like right after my sister passed away, like I quit my job at Starbucks. I love my coworkers. It was actually a very queer and Black store that I worked at. It's the one right beside Bradley. And so it's really awesome to be with a bunch of people of color and a lot of LGBTQ plus folks. Um, so my coworkers were great, but I hated the work.
Right.
And so like quitting that, focusing more on my work here at Central and my friends in public health, and advocacy for my community, and then trying to heal from loss, but then also heal from school. Like academia, again, leaves its mark on you. And so started making work that was more in line with who I am, like making my work, instead of working in series, having everything have to relate, just doing what I'm doing and letting that be the work of Alexander Martin. And it felt a lot better. I started doing that with my drag too, and investing more. I was like, I'd always feel bad for like buying something, like buying a hairpiece or buying supplies. But now I'm like, this is an investment, and like, it's something I love, it's going to bring me so much joy, and I'm going to keep using it and then use it to make opportunities for myself. And so that was sort of that switch, but it was leading up to that moment, like 2018 to 2019, I was really sort of disconnected from my work and feeling a little bit lost, kind of like going through the motions, sort of numb
For sure.
between, yeah. And so like my work during that time, there's some things that stuck through that I really like that I'm still using, but there's other things that like aren't documented anywhere because I don't know, I wasn't connected to them.
Sure. Yeah, I totally get that. Moving into more of your public health work, obviously you're at work right now at Central Illinois Friends. How did you kind of get interested in that? It seems a little bit different from your other work, so I'm curious.
So I volunteered with them at a few events, and then my boss, who's our executive director, reached out to me about doing some work with them. And so there was a moment after grad school where I was working as a barista, working at a gallery space, teaching at Bradley. And then he approached me with some part-time work here. And I was like, yeah, I'll do that. That sounds great. Too many, don't work that many jobs ever. But it started off as sort of like I was getting paid, but it was like advocacy and outreach. Like we work predominantly in HIV prevention and care, and HIV disproportionately affects the Black community, disproportionately affects LGBTQ plus people, specifically LGBTQ plus people of color. And I was able to sort of advocate and learn things and learn about systematic racism and learn about the effects that it has on people, learn about the problems of public health. And then this organization, like we're doing so much for LGBTQ plus health, so much for accessibility, that I was like sort of fell in love with the work. Like now I'm a test counselor. I also do their design work and outreach and education. And now I do this full time because it resonates with what I do as an artist. Like this job is one of the things that helped me like quit my job as a barista, but then also really focus in on even if it's hard, I'm never going to not do a job that doesn't line up with what it is I want to do. And so even public health is different from the arts, this is just as much as part of my art practice as drag or as painting or drawing or sculpting is, because it's community outreach, it's education, it's advocacy, it's sharing resources, thinking about accessibility. And like my work is about being queer and Black, and through this job, I advocate and work with the queer and Black community.
Right.
So it makes my work as an artist better. Like thinking about other jobs down the road, or like move somewhere, places that I could see myself working. I am like, whatever the things I'm doing at this job, I'm going to make sure I find a way to always do that. Like it won't necessarily be through HIV prevention, but take knowledge and skill set that I've learned from here and the advocacy I can do here to keep that with me no matter what I'm doing. Sort of like how I fell into it, and then it just like it relates to my work so much that it made sense, and it's still making sense.
For sure. With activism as a whole, and what we saw kind of during the summer of 2020 with the whole Black Lives Matter movement and other movements like the feminist movement that has been going on for some time now, have you seen anything within your particular community, whether that be, an intersectional approach or just one or the other, kinds of performative activism? Is there anything that has like stood out to you, especially during the summer?
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of people that are trying to do better. Like I have people I went to high school and college with, like reading anti-racist literature. Like that blows my mind, and that's amazing because that's actual like investment. Like take the photo and share that they're reading it, but like local bookstores started having these pieces up for sale, providing them for the community, providing anti-racist literature, sort of works like packages that you could go and read.
Right.
And people were starting to actually learn, and people stopped asking questions. They were like, oh, I can look this stuff up myself. I'm like, thank you. Thank you. But there were some performative things, like there were people checking in on me, which I still like, I appreciate. Like, no one ever really checks in on like people of color. So having folks check in on me was really awesome. But then some folks who I hadn't talked to in ages were like popping in and then disappearing. And I'm like, this feels a little performative.
Right.
Copy and pasted message to like every person of color, you know, and I'm like, thank you for checking in on me, but like you don't check on me about other things. So focus on what you're doing. Like the people who check on regularly checking in on me was really good. It was heartwarming. But I did see some examples of like it's really popular to have a hashtag or to do stuff, but like you can utilize that platform, like social media, other things, to have a conversation, to make information more available. And I think some people did do that, which was it's really cool to see. It's also nice to like that you don't have to have as much of a conversation. Like I can talk about something with systematic racism, and then people are like, oh yeah, because they've researched it, they've looked it up.
Right.
And that feels good. So there's definitely progress made, and so I hope that momentum keeps up. But yeah, you can tell when there's performative things, like it feels a certain way.
Right.
And it's like I don't always have the way to call it out before I see it, but I know it when I do see it.
Right.
And so actions over time, I think, dictate actual progress. And so if they keep that momentum, then you know. And like seeing people change their mindset and educate themselves and learn was a positive thing.
For sure. With progress, and I know you've changed your pronouns within the span of however many years you've been living here. I watched a documentary made by a student where it was 2 years ago, I believe, where your pronouns were he, him. And I'm curious because I've only ever identified as she, her, and so I've met more people. I've started meeting more people who identify as, gender nonconforming or non-binary, and I understand the use of pronouns and how disheartening it can be when people don't want to adhere to just a simple rule that you have for yourself. How has, or do you think that the advocacy around that and around accepting people for not adhering to those kind of gender norms, do you think that that's improved, or do you think there's still quite a stigma around it?
I think it's more visible. And so there's more advocacy, more literacy happening with that, more people trying to learn. But it's still always going to be difficult because we have a binary ingrained in us. Like we still look at sex as being binary, and sex is not. It's way more complicated than that.
Yeah.
It's way more complicated than it's chromosomes, hormones, tissue, like everything intersects to create whatever our sex is. And I remember an undergrad being like, oh, I've met trans people, like I understand that, but I don't understand like gender nonconforming or non-binary. Like I remember thinking that, and now look, like 7 years later, look at me.
Yeah, right.
But I think it was like, I don't know how to explain this sensation exactly, but like when I was making that documentary, I started hearing, like I knew about non-binary folk and gender nonconforming folk, but I started hearing more about it. And I was like, oh no, I think I still identify as this. But I also think it was a form of protection, just like when people don't wait for the right moment to come out. I was like, I was afraid of, because seeing some of the struggles that my friends who were non-binary or gender nonconforming went through and being respected, I sort of felt that pressure, and I was afraid to sort of express that. And then I also, like the more I sort of nurtured my femininity, like I mentioned earlier, like I thought I was a trans woman. It's like, well, to find out, like I am trans, just not in that way.
Yeah.
But it was like, I felt so connected to that part of myself because it had been repressed for so long. But then learning that like you can have, because no one, everyone wants to classify gender and look at it as a binary, but no one questions if like someone who is, if a cis man, like, I mean, sometimes people pass judgment, but look at like a punk concert or something. If like a cis man performing on stage with no polish and their hair and makeup on, everyone's like, oh, that's just who they are at that moment. Or if a cis woman wears sweatpants and puts like their hair up or something in a beanie, no one questions. I mean, again, there's still stigma and things, but gender is changing all the time for everybody. Like everyone's gender changes every day, and you express certain parts of it and you come up with a term that lets you identify with who you are overall. Like if someone's like, identify as a woman, that's how they feel all the time, but that woman they identify with expresses herself in different ways. And so learning that it was okay to express that feminine and masculine energy and that energy outside of that, like outside of binary, again, it was really slow process. Like the first thing I did was change my pronouns on Instagram, and then trans to my bio as an artist, and then people started doing it from seeing that, or people who like, it was wild. Some people asked me my pronouns before I even like came out, because they could feel that shift. Like you feel people's truth, like like that's why I hate when folks misgender people, because I'm like, how can you look at them and not feel not feel the energy they're giving off? Like that is like, I've had friends who have come out to me and the moment they do, it just clicks. I'm like, oh, that's what I'm feeling from you.
Exactly.
Like, so much sense. Like you can't see them any other way. And so like seeing people do that with me made me feel confident enough to sort of proclaim it. And in doing that, I felt more connected to myself, more connected to my body, my masculine and like I've never gotten like a hormone screening, but like I am look and shaped and very much like the women in my family. And so it's like I felt better embracing those parts of my body. My body confidence went through the roof because like I don't think, at least not at this current juncture, I don't think I would do HRT or anything right now. I mean, who knows? Things change, life can change. But right now I don't see myself doing HRT or anything, but my body reflects how I feel. And so it was like, it was there in how I was presenting myself, how I was feeling, but I couldn't wrap my head around that identity. And then as soon as I came out, it's just things like, it's like finding when you're playing with that little block set as a kid and like finding the right shape to go in the right slot, things just lined up. And it was like, this all makes sense. My whole experience from birth to now, I'm almost 28, I'm almost 30, makes so much more sense. And like other people could see that in me before I could even see it. So I don't know, it felt good. And there's still like backlash. There's still, to go back to your question, that was a little bit long-winded of an answer.
No, you're good. You're good.
To go back to your question, like there was, they're still explaining that to people is still complicated, but there's a lot more literature out there. People can just look it up. And also like, you have to sort of come to terms with like, I know sometimes people are only going to see me as what they think I am.
Right.
Sometimes people don't know what they think I am.
Exactly.
But like, they're going to believe whatever they want. But it's not going to change how I feel or who I am. Like, it may make me angry or make me upset, but it's not going to change my experience. It's not going to change who I am and what resonates with me. Like, none of that's going to shift.
Right.
So they'll just stay mad. Yeah.
So I think I read somewhere that you did some sex education within Peoria Public Schools. Is that right? Was there talk about like differences in sexuality and, gender identity, or was it more just still about safe sex, whether that was, homosexual or heterosexual?
It was all of the above. So it's split up by grade because it's through HOLT, the Center for Healthy Living. my job partners with them to do education to provide diversity in their group, because like I look like the students, like District 150 has a lot of Black students. I'm also, so like they're seeing someone that looks like them, seeing a queer person. And so sixth graders learn about gender stereotypes. So we talk a little bit, use some vocabulary to talk about gender identity. And then also if they ask questions, of course, I lean into it and be like, oh yeah, let's talk about this. But it's more about people can wear makeup and paint their nails and still like that doesn't define who they are. That's just something like doing. And like boys can like flowers and pink and girls can like football. And it doesn't like navigating that, like breaking down to gender stereotypes and talking about bullying because of gender stereotypes. Now people lash out. And so you're talking about identity, but in a little bit more of like not an accessible way, but like making it to them, making it seem like common sense. Like, oh yeah, why would someone for liking something?
Yeah.
With eighth graders, there's two sections. One is sexual health, specifically like talking about STIs, kind of gender and sexuality, focuses in on gender identity, sexuality, sexual orientation, sex assigned at birth, and sort of like the crash course in like the LGBTQ plus acronym and the identities and sexualities therein. And so that one was always really interesting, especially like once I started living in my truth a little bit more. I would have kids be like, because I mean, kids sometimes be rude and they're almost in high school, but they would say, like, because they were like, are you a boy or a girl? And I'm like, I'm Alex. And they're like, no, but are you a boy or a girl? And then like, after I gave them some of the lecture, I'd be like, what are you asking when you ask that? And they're like, if they're a boy or girl, I'm like, no, look at our vocabulary. Like, what are you asking? And they're like, I guess I'm asking their sex assigned at birth. And I was like, and what does that mean? Like, I guess I'm asking what sexual organs they were born with. I'm like, is that a weird question? And they're like, yes. And it's like, exactly. Like, you have no idea what anybody was born with, and they don't have to tell you. That's a very personal and bizarre question. And so sort of framing it like, of course, I like the things talked specifically about like trans folks and intersex folks, but like I always brought in a little bit about being genderqueer, non-binary, just because of my experience. Like saying, emphasizing like gender and sexuality are separate things, and that gender and sex are separate things, and they're really complicated things. And so there's always wild questions, but students listen. Sometimes there's backlash from parents, but for the most part, listened.
That's good. And so was this part of your nonprofit organization, or was it funded by the state, or?
Yeah, it's part of the nonprofit work.
Okay.
Partnering with like I was getting paid at work to be sort of one of their educators, because like we're all sort of in like the same kind of training. And so just going into the schools with Holt and teaching these programs, especially like with the sexual health portion, like since we're a sexual health organization, we know community resources. So it just made sense to bring that in. And then having queer folk in your organization, like it's easier for them to talk about being a member of the LGBTQ plus community.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I had that education. I went to a school in the middle of cornfields, and we had the just traditional sex education, but getting to college, I started experiencing all these things and was like, oh my God, I wish I knew things sooner, you know?
Well, making a Tumblr in 2015.
Oh my gosh, yes.
And there's other queer folk out there, other people with shared experiences. And then also like, for me too, it was like seeing people of color celebrated, like seeing these beautiful folks on like Instagram and Tumblr that are like, they have their natural hair, they're varying body shapes and sizes, they're confidently living in their gender. I was like, whoa.
Yeah. I mean, seriously, when I finally came out to myself, like you said, I started realizing all of these, I guess, signs from, previous lives. I was like, oh my gosh, I knew this then, but I didn't understand till now. And that's just an amazing feeling.
Yeah. And people always talk about like, oh, it's just because they're on the internet, see this, see that. I'm like, no, it's because you never provided the education they need. So they had to go to the internet to meet other people like them. And it's they never look into themselves, so they don't know that these people are out there existing. But it's like you find out that like you're not alone in your experience, and it feels good and it helps you navigate that.
Yeah, I mean, being a journalism student, I've seen just more and more kind of firsthand news about how Gen Z is technically like they're the most queer generation, and that it's really something interesting because the study isn't about, oh, more Gen Z kids are queer. It's just that we're talking about it more and we're more accepting of the just the labels and being a part of a community that isn't discriminatory, but I mean they are, but that's a whole nother layered topic. But seeing that being reported on is really like inspiring for me, because I want to go into gender and sexuality like advocacy within my writing, but it's just interesting to see the shift in how generational a different sexuality is.
Mm-hmm. And it's like, I think it's the visibility of it, because folks have existed forever in our community, but like if they went back, if they did that study, like there's more people being out in Gen Z, like out while they were middle school or high school.
Yeah.
What if they were and asked all the millennials who were in high school in like the early 2000s, late 90s, how many of them have gone on a journey? And
exactly.
It's just that's more visible, and so we feel safe, or there's a community, like people can, like unfortunately, like LGBTQ plus youth are at risk of homelessness all the time. Like it's a huge problem, and like high rates of suicide. But how many folks maybe get kicked out of their house, but they find refuge in like an online community that then crowdsources for them to get them a place to stay, to find them resources. Like they're helping each other survive. And now younger folks are seeing that. They're like, well, I'm going to live my truth. Like, why?
Yeah.
And that there's more discourse about it. We can talk about it and talk about the nuances therein, like gender and sexuality. Like there's a documentary where there's like a woman she's an older lesbian woman, and she identifies as a woman, but she was like, if more people would have been having these conversations when I was younger, she's like, I probably would have identified as a man.
Right.
Where there's some like it's a quote from like a book, but it's talking about like gender queerness and like butchdom. Okay. And there's a lesbian in it who was like, well, I remember, like this is like in the 80s or something, she's like, I remember never really identifying as a woman or a man, but I just identified as a lesbian. Like,
love that.
Gender expression and sexuality, these things have always had multiple facets. It's just now people are talking about it enough that you can like if you look at something under a microscope enough, you find out there's more things there.
Exactly.
And there's more things there. And so it's being looked at. And so people can find the specific area in which they feel most comfortable at.
Right. Well, I think that is all the questions I have for you. I really appreciate all of your time. You gave me some great answers, and I can't wait to go back and listen to all this, and this kind of sets the tone for the rest of them. And I love how unapologetic you are about yourself and your journey. And it's truly amazing to see someone like you in a community where I've seen a lot less people like myself. So I really appreciate all of your time and your information and details about your life and stuff.
Well, no problem. Thank you so much for having me. Shoot me an email if you have any questions, or if you need pointed in the direction of more people in the community or folks to reach out to.
For sure. Awesome. Thank you so much, Alex.
No problem. Bye.
Bye.